Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu has put his judicial reform plan on hold until next month. This comes after massive protests and strikes that escalated over the weekend. Embassies around the world had to close. Imtiaz Tayeb is in Tel Aviv, Israel.
The general strike that shut down much of Israel has been called off tonight. The nationwide protests that reached a crescendo in the last 24 hours are set to continue, even after Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu promised to press pause on the bitterly contested judicial overhaul.
I will continue protesting until these reforms are completely dropped, because this isn't a set of reforms. This is a coup.
But far-right counter-protesters called to the streets today by Netanyahu are also defiant. I'm in favor of the reform, this man says, because I want equality for people like me and not have arrogant people above us. If passed, the judicial reforms would allow a simple majority of lawmakers to override almost any Supreme Court ruling and let politicians appoint justices, something that would devastate Israel's democracy, says opponents. The 12 weeks of unprecedented mass unrest escalated on Sunday night after Netanyahu fired the defense minister, a move which saw the long-simmering divisions in Israeli society erupt even further, including outside Netanyahu's own residence. Protesters are largely divided into two groups, those who want a more secular and pluralist state, and those who want a more religious and nationalist country. Also sparking serious concerns are the growing number of army reservists vowing to strike if the reforms go ahead, with military leaders warning their operational readiness could seriously be impacted.
Now, the Biden administration has welcomed this pause in the judicial overhaul, but senior figures in the Netanyahu government are vowing it will pass. John.
Imtiaz Tayeb in Tel Aviv, Israel. Thank you. For more on this, I am joined by Dov Waxman. He's a professor of Israeli studies at UCLA. Thank you so much for being here. What led to this moment, this crisis moment that's happening in Israel?
Well, the immediate crisis was precipitated by the firing of Israel's defense minister, who was a popular figure. And this really was seen by many Israelis as Netanyahu particularly really prioritizing this judicial overhaul, which is very controversial, over Israel's national security. The fact that the defense minister warned that this was tearing apart the military was something that I think was the final straw for many Israelis to turn out on the streets.
And the defense minister had said, stop this, put it on pause, and Netanyahu essentially fired him for it.
That's right.
And so then Netanyahu's now said, well, this will pause for a month. What's that going to do?
Well, I think he's hoping that the protest movement will really demobilize, the momentum of the protests will be lost, and that when they resume after the parliament returns, that they'll be able to push through this reform then with less protest. So it's really a tactical retreat rather than a real change of plan.
Help us understand both the nature of the opposition to Netanyahu and also the size of these protests. I mean, is this unprecedented? And if so, just help us put that into context.
Well, I think there's certainly been very large single demonstrations in Israel's history. But what's unique about the current protest movement is the breadth of this movement. This is something that has brought in groups that aren't really known for their political action, high-tech workers, lawyers, doctors, teachers. So this is really a broad protest movement. And the fact that it's been able to turn out hundreds of thousands of Israelis across the country week after week is really something that I think is historically unprecedented.
One of the people in Imtiaz's piece talked about this as a coup. Are those the stakes? What are the stakes at this moment?
That is absolutely, I think, a correct characterization of what the government's trying to do. Essentially, they are seeking to undermine the independence of the Supreme Court and control the appointment process to the Supreme Court, therefore essentially giving the government complete control, the freedom to pass whatever laws it wants. And I think the protesters on the streets see this as not just a judicial reform, which is what the government's presenting it as, but rather an attempt to give the government unlimited power. And that would turn Israel into an illiberal democracy at best, if not even potentially pave the way for Israel to become an authoritarian state.
And so, well, what would that do to U.S. relations with Israel? I mean, so many times politicians say we have this bond that is built in part because we are both democracies.
Absolutely. I mean, the shared democratic values has been one of the factors that has really underpinned the relationship. And certainly for many Americans, when they perceive Israel, it is Israel's democratic nature that they like. So I think it would really undermine US support for Israel in the long term if this judicial reform is implemented. And even in the short term, it creates a real headache for the Biden administration, who have a whole lot of foreign policy challenges, some of which they need the Israeli government's cooperation with. And in Israel, it's complete turmoil right now. So it's not good for the US-Israel relationship in the short term, and in the long term, it could actually undermine US support for Israel.
All right. Dov Waxman, thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure.
It's good to see you.